Today we're looking at 8 of the most controversial cars in NASCAR history that were so dominant, or just so unique, that NASCAR had no choice but to ban them. Don't forget to subscribe. At number 8, the Plymouth Superbird is one of the most iconic and recognizable cars in NASCAR history. Born out of the intense competition of the Aero Wars in the late 1960s, the Superbird was Plymouth's answer to Dodge Charger's Daytona, which had already taken the NASCAR world by storm. The story of the Superbird begins with Richard Petty, also known as the King. In 1969, Petty left Plymouth to race for Ford after feeling that Plymouth's cars were no longer competitive on the super speedways. Plymouth knew they needed to do something radical to bring Petty back and stay relevant in NASCAR. With Dodge already fielding the Charger Daytona, Plymouth had a blueprint for what a successful aerodynamic car could look like. They decided to take inspiration from the Daytona and build their own version. The result was the Plymouth Superbird, a car that took the Daytona's formula and pushed it even further. One of the most distinctive features of the Superbird is its elongated nose cone, which extends the front end by 19 inches. Unlike the Daytona's pointed nose, the Superbird's nose cone had a more rounded design that provided similar aerodynamic benefits, but with a slightly different look. But the Superbird's defining feature has to be its towering rear wing, which made it an absolute standout in the track. Standing at 24 inches above the trunk lid, the engineers at Plymouth had carefully designed it to create maximum downforce without adding extra drag. The height of the wing was actually a deliberate design choice. It was placed so high to stay clear of the turbulent air coming off the car's roofline, ensuring a clean flow of air over the wing and generating optimal downforce. Under the hood, the Superbird packed some serious firepower. The car was available with a choice of 3 engines, but the most iconic option was the 426 Hemi V8. On the track, the Superbird lived up to its purpose. In the 1970 NASCAR season, the Superbird secured 8 victories and helped Plymouth re-establish its presence in NASCAR. By 1971, NASCAR officials decided to implement new regulations aimed at curbing the Aero Wars. These rules effectively banned the Superbird from NASCAR competition, as it couldn't compete with its signature 426 Hemi under the new restrictions. Just like that, the Superbird's reign on the track came to an abrupt end. Plymouth had to produce at least 1,920 street-legal Superbirds. These cars were nearly identical to the race versions, complete with a nose cone and rear wing, making them some of the most unique and collectible muscle cars ever built. In January 2023, a 1970 Plymouth Superbird with a 446 barrel engine sold for $550,000 at Barrett-Jackson's Scottsdale auction. At number 7, I've got the Chevrolet TRex car. Developed by Hendrick Motorsport, it's one of the most fascinating and controversial cars in NASCAR history. Built for the 1997 Winston All-Star race, this car took advantage of every gray area in the NASCAR rulebook. In 1997, Hendrick Motorsports was already a powerhouse in NASCAR, having won the Winston Cup Championship in 1995 and scoring numerous wins in the seasons leading up to the T-Rex's debut. But crew chief Ray Evernham wasn't satisfied with simply staying competitive. He wanted Hendrick Motorsports to stay ahead of the competition. That's where Rex Stump came in. Most NASCAR cars in the 1990s were focused primarily on mechanical grip, how well the tires could stick to the track. But the T-Rex was engineered with a different approach. Stump and Evernham designed the car's chassis to create a ground effect, similar to what you'd see in Formula 1 cars. The car's frame rails were reinforced and positioned in a way that allowed the T-Rex to land in the corners, sealing the underbody to the track and generating a sort of negative pressure that kept it planted. Essentially, the car hugged the track more effectively than any other car at the time, allowing it to corner with higher stability and speed. Another key innovation of the T-Rex was its front valence, which was set noticeably higher than other cars on the grid. This design choice was intended to maximize airflow beneath the car, enhancing the ground effect even further. The race date came on May 17, 1997 at Charlotte Motor Speedway in Concord, North Carolina. Jeff Gordon initially qualified well, but was relegated to the back of the pack due to overshooting his pit stall during qualifying. However, it didn't take long for Gordon to start moving through the field. In the first 30-lap segment, he went from 19th to 3rd, and then after the field was inverted for the second segment, he moved up from 16th to 4th in just another 30 laps. Finally, in the last 10-lap shootout, Gordon went from 4th to 1st in just a lap and a half, taking the lead and never looking back. He won the race with a significant lead, leaving competitors in awe. Gordon himself later recalled that the T-Rex felt different from anything he had driven before, describing it as if the car were glued to the track. Of course, this dominance didn't go unnoticed by NASCAR officials. After the race, Bill France Jr., NASCAR's president at the time, called Evernham and Hendrick into his office. France made it clear that the T-Rex wouldn't be allowed back on the track. NASCAR officials then inspected the car thoroughly, looking at every detail and realizing just how many gray areas it had exploited. Following the inspection, NASCAR tightened the rules on chassis modifications, ride height, and ground effect, making it clear that future cars would have to stay within stricter guidelines. The original T-Rex car is part of Hendrick Motorsport's private collection and is not available for sale. Given its historical significance, I don't think it will be offered to the public anytime soon. Number 6 is the Ford Torino Talladega, one of the most iconic cars of NASCAR's legendary Aero Wars era. Created to bring Ford back to the top of the racing world, Dodge had just unleashed the Charger Daytona, a car that looked more like a jet than a traditional stock car. Ford had no choice but to respond, and they did so with the Torino Talladega, named after the famous Talladega Superspeedway, which was built around the same time. The Talladega's nose was extended and lowered, creating a pointed front that was designed to cut through the air with less resistance. By modifying the front bumper, pushing it flush against the body, and reshaping the grille, Ford reduced the drag significantly. Ford equipped the Torino Talladega with the powerful 428 Cobra Jet V8 engine. This engine was a beast, delivering 335 horsepower and around 400 foot-pounds of torque, although I believe those factory numbers were conservative. The 1969 racing season proved that Ford's aero-focused design paid off. Right out of the gate, the Torino Talladega made waves by dominating races and securing wins. Drivers like David Pearson, who piloted the Talladega for much of the 1969 season, showed just how competitive the car could be. Pearson won the 1969 NASCAR Grand National Series Championship, finishing ahead of James Hilton and Richard Petty. Overall, the Ford Torino Talladega secured 29 wins out of the 54 races in the 1969 and 1970 NASCAR Grand National Series. And Ford won the 1969 NASCAR Manufacturers Championship, largely due to Talladega's dominance. But even though the Torino Talladega was successful on the track, NASCAR had concerns. The speed at which this car could run was reaching new heights, pushing the limits of both technology and safety. NASCAR was worried that the Aero Wars were creating a dangerous environment where speeds were increasing faster than the safety standards of the time could keep up. In 1971, NASCAR stepped in and implemented new rules that restricted aerodynamic modifications. These regulations effectively banned the Torino Talladega and other aero cars from competition, marking the end of a short but memorable era in NASCAR. Ford's efforts with the Talladega had proven their point, showing that they could go toe-to-toe with Dodge on the track and make a mark in NASCAR history. Talladega was of course built in limited quantities to meet NASCAR's homologation rules, with only 754 Torino Talladegas ever produced. You can find one for sale at an auction in good condition for about $90,000. At number 5, the Dodge Charger Daytona is one of the most iconic cars in NASCAR history, and for good reason. Built to dominate the superspeedways like Daytona and Talladega, this car changed the face of NASCAR in the late 1960s and became a symbol that defined this era. By the 60s, Dodge found itself in a tough spot in NASCAR. Ford and Chevrolet were leading the field, and Dodge's current lineup just wasn't cutting it. They needed something that could take advantage of the high-speed tracks and give their drivers a serious edge. The answer? Aerodynamics. The Charger Daytona was the first NASCAR vehicle specifically designed for high-speed stability, a game-changer in stock car racing. Engineers worked closely with Chrysler's aerodynamics team, taking what they knew from their research into jet aircraft and applying it to the Daytona's design. The car's most noticeable feature was its nose cone, which extended the Charger's front end by 18 inches. It was designed to reduce air resistance and slice through the air with minimal drag. The elongated front end helped the Daytona maintain higher speeds on the straights, making it ideal for the long, fast tracks that were increasingly defining NASCAR. The Charger Daytona's massive rear wing towered 2 feet above the trunk, giving the car one of the most unique profiles in racing history. The wing was engineered to provide maximum downforce while minimizing drag, which is crucial when you're trying to keep a car stable at speeds over 200 miles per hour. The engineers actually placed the wing higher than usual to avoid the turbulence created by the car's rear deck. Under the hood, the Charger Daytona packed some serious power. It was available with 2 engine options, the 426 Hemi V8 and the 440 Magnum V8. The 426 Hemi was the real showstopper, as we already know. In 1969, the car made history by becoming the first NASCAR vehicle to break the 200-mile-per-hour barrier. This milestone was achieved by Buddy Baker at Talladega Superspeedway, who hit a staggering 200.44 miles per hour during a test session. On the track, the Charger Daytona racked up impressive stats. In the 1969 and 1970 seasons, the Daytona claimed 6 wins, but didn't actually win the Daytona 500. Irony at its best. However, the car's dominance didn't go unnoticed by NASCAR officials, who began to worry about the speeds and safety again. The new regulations imposed restrictions on aerodynamics and limited engine displacement to 305 cubic inches for cars with significant aerodynamic modifications. This was essentially a death sentence for the Daytona in NASCAR, as the car is no longer able to use its 426 Hemi or 440 Magnum engines, and its extreme aero design was now illegal. Only 503 Daytonas were ever produced for the street to meet NASCAR's homologation requirements, making it an extremely rare find. These cars can fetch hundreds of thousands of dollars at auction, especially models equipped with the original 426 Hemi engine. The Charger Daytona's rarity and history have turned it into a true automotive legend. We're already in the top 4. Back in the early 1960s, Chrysler was looking for a way to break through NASCAR's top ranks. The answer? The 426 Hemi, an engine so powerful that it would become known as the Elephant for its sheer size and monstrous performance. First, let's look at the specs. The 426 Hemi was named after its displacement, 426 cubic inches, or about 7 liters, and featured a unique hemispherical combustion chamber design. With its hemispherical combustion chamber, the engine could burn fuel more efficiently with better airflow, leading to more power per cubic inch than its competitors could manage. This design wasn't new in the world of engines, but Chrysler had perfected it to a point where it could deliver enormous power. Right out of the gate, the 426 Hemi was pushing an impressive 425 horsepower and 490 foot-pounds of torque. Dodge Carnet and Plymouth Belvedere perfectly designed to handle this engine's power. Just FYI, both Dodge and Plymouth were already owned by Chrysler at the time. Hemi could go the distance as well and had enough durability to handle long stretches of high speed without a hiccup. In its debut season in 1964, the 426 Hemi was nothing short of dominant. Richard Petty, the king himself, took first place in a Plymouth equipped with a Hemi, and 3 other Hemi-powered cars followed him to the finish line. By the end of the 1964 season, Hemi-powered cars had racked up 26 wins out of the 62 races in the stock car series. Dodge and Plymouth, powered by Hemi, were so dominant that NASCAR had to do something. So in 1965, NASCAR did the stupidest thing they could. They banned the 426 Hemi, citing it as too good for the sport. Dodge Carnet and Plymouth Belvedere were dead in the water. The official reason given was that the Hemi was not available in enough production cars to meet NASCAR's homologation requirements. But let's be real here. This was more about the Hemi's performance on the track than availability in showrooms. The Hemi was simply making NASCAR too predictable, and that predictability wasn't good for the sport's entertainment value. Chrysler pulled out of NASCAR entirely for the 1965 season in protest, refusing to field cars without the Hemi engine. Not seeing Plymouth and Dodge on the track that year was honestly sad. After a year on the sidelines, Chrysler returned in 1966 when NASCAR revised the rules, allowing the Hemi to compete again as long as it was offered in production cars. Chrysler responded by making the Hemi available in the Dodge Carnet and Plymouth Belvedere, 2 models that could be sold in showrooms and were affordable enough to meet NASCAR's requirements. With the 426 Hemi back under the hood, Dodge and Plymouth came roaring back, and NASCAR is once again filled with the raw power of the Hemi on the track. In the years that followed, the 426 Hemi continued to be a force in NASCAR. Cars equipped with the Hemi won numerous races and championships. If you're thinking of buying one, a 1966 Dodge Carnet 426 Hemi sold for $71,680 in August 2024, and 1965 Plymouth Belvedere fetched a price of over $90,000. And I think the prices of these will keep going up. Number 3 takes it back to 1957. At that time, Chevrolet was shaking up the racing world with something revolutionary: fuel injection. Chevrolet rolled out this fuel injection system as part of the 1957 Corvette and the Bel Air lineup, particularly with the 283 cubic inch small block V8 engine. Now, this engine was already a beast in its own right, but with the addition of fuel injection, it could crank out a whopping 283 horsepower, 1 horsepower per cubic inch of displacement. This was a massive milestone, setting a new standard for performance in racing. Suddenly, Chevy's fuel-injected V8 could blow past competitors on the track, and fans loved it. NASCAR, on the other hand, not so much. Until then, the typical racing car relied on carburetors to mix the fuel and air. With the introduction of fuel injection, a technology that lets engines burn fuel with insane precision, resulting in 3 major advantages. First, there was the instant throttle response, which was more precise than a carbureted, slower, less efficient fuel mixture. Then, there was the enhanced fuel efficiency, which meant Chevy's engines could race longer without refueling as often as their carbureted rivals. And let's not forget about the sheer power. A fuel-injected engine could make a lap around the track faster and with less strain on the engine. The result? Chevy's fuel-injected cars became so dominant that NASCAR had to step in and ban them. But Chevrolet didn't take it lying down. Their small block V8 remained a powerful engine, and they pushed carbureted technology as far as it could go, dominating in NASCAR in the next few years. It wouldn't be until decades later, in 2012, that fuel injection would make its comeback in NASCAR. Today, a fuel-injected 57 Corvette or Bel Air is a highly prized collector's item. In mint condition, these cars can fetch prices in the 6-figure range at auction. Number 2 brings us the Chevrolet Monte Carlo SS, especially the versions produced between 1986 and 1988. This car left a huge mark on NASCAR history. The origins of the Monte Carlo SS's dominance in NASCAR can be traced to Chevrolet's goal to bring aerodynamic advantages to the racetrack. By the mid-1980s, aerodynamics had become a key factor in NASCAR, and the standard Monte Carlo wasn't quite cutting it. So, Chevrolet introduced the Monte Carlo SS Aero Coupe in 1986, specifically engineered to improve airflow and high-speed stability. The Aero Coupe's main feature was its fastback rear window, a design tweak that may seem small but made a significant difference. By creating a sloped rear windshield, Chevy was able to reduce drag and increase downforce, providing a crucial edge on the superspeedways. The Monte Carlo SS wasn't just about aerodynamics though. It had power under the hood to back up its sleek looks. Powered by a 5-liter V8 engine, the Monte Carlo SS produced around 180 horsepower in the street version, though NASCAR race versions were tuned to to generate significantly more power. In the 1986 season, Dale Earnhardt in Monte Carlo SS dominated, winning 5 races and finishing in the top 5 a staggering 16 times. This performance helped him secure the Winston Cup Championship, an achievement that he would repeat the following year. The Monte Carlo SS Aero Coupe success wasn't limited to 1 or 2 seasons. It became a fixture at the front of the pack, and its consistent performance led to more drivers choosing Chevrolet as their weapon of choice. The impact of the Monte Carlo SS in NASCAR spilled over into the streets, where the car became an instant classic. Chevrolet marketed the street version as a performance car that gave everyday drivers a taste of NASCAR engineering. However, all good things come to an end, and by 1988, NASCAR changed its rules to address some of the competitive advantage the Monte Carlo SS Aero Coupe had on the track. The changes in regulations required a shift away from aerodynamic modifications, which diminished the Aero Coupe's advantage. With NASCAR leaving the playing field, Chevrolet stopped producing the Aero Coupe and transitioned to different models. Yet the Monte Carlo SS's legacy had already been cemented. Its contributions to Chevrolet's racing success and its influence on NASCAR's rules were undeniable. Chevy built around 6,000 Aero Coupe models for the street between 1986 and 1987, and you can still pick one up under $20,000. At number 1, my favorite car. The Hudson Hornet is one of the most legendary cars in NASCAR history, a vehicle that practically defined the early 1950s on the track. The heart of the Hudson Hornet was its powerful engine, known as the Twin H-Power. The Hornet was equipped with a 308 cubic inch inline-6 engine, one of the largest and most powerful 6-cylinder engines of its time. While V8 engines were the trend among other manufacturers, Hudson stuck with the inline-6 and managed to make it a powerhouse. The 308 engine with the Twin H-Power option packed dual single-barrel carburetors and a high compression cylinder head, giving it a notable advantage. This setup produced around 145 horsepower at first, and with a few factory modifications, it could go up to about 170 horsepower. In an era when most competitors were working with engines that produced less than 150 horsepower, the Hornet's 308 engine made it an absolute monster on the track. The Hornet's engineers also designed a step-down chassis that gave the car a unique, low-slung profile. By lowering the floor pan between the frame rails, Hudson made a car that hugged the track like nothing else. This combination of a powerful engine and a stable, low-riding chassis made the Hudson Hornet nearly unbeatable on the track. In its debut season in 1951, driven by NASCAR legends like Herb Thomas and Marshall Teague, the Hornet quickly became the car to beat. In fact, Herb Thomas alone won 12 races in the 1953 season, ultimately securing the NASCAR Grand National Championship that year. Overall, Hudson Hornets won an astounding 27 out of the 34 races in 1952. Herb Thomas wasn't the only driver who took the Hornet to victory. Tim Flock, another NASCAR legend, drove the Hornet to a win in the Grand National Championships in 1952. One of the defining moments in the Hornet's legacy was the famous Fabulous Hudson Hornet campaign, which became a marketing legend. Hudson branded its race cars with the Fabulous Hudson Hornet logo, and the name stuck, becoming part of American pop culture. The Hudson Hornet brought NASCAR closer to everyday car enthusiasts, bridging the gap between race cars and street cars in a way that few vehicles have since. Unfortunately, the Hudson Hornet's reign couldn't last forever. By the mid-1950s, Hudson as a company was struggling financially and ultimately merged with Nash to form American Motors Corporation. The merger led to a decline in support for Hudson's racing program. As V8 engines became the standard in NASCAR, the Hornet's inline-6 started to lose its competitive edge. Although the Hornet was ahead of its time, the automotive world was moving on, and without the resources to keep up, Hudson's time in the NASCAR spotlight faded. The car technically was not banned by NASCAR. Rather, Hudson was just unable to adapt quickly to the shift to V8 engines. But I bet you anything, if such a dominant car was developed in the 60s, 80s, or 90s, it would have been banned by NASCAR after the first season. The Hudson Hornet was produced from 1951 to 1954, and with under 80,000 units, it made it a collector's item for sure. Recently, I've seen one sold in auction for $82,500, but I've seen them go cheaper at about $50,000. Do you think NASCAR made the right call banning all of these cars, or should they have been allowed to race? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe.